This car does not belong here. Neither do you." His voice rolled out in a deep, gravelly growl, thick with undeserved authority and open contempt. Under the bright sun, a corrupt and racist police officer locked his gaze on a beautiful black woman dressed in flowing silk, certain she would prove easy prey in his wealthy neighborhood. He tried to extort her, to threaten her, to break her will. He demanded that she bow to his power. What he failed to understand was that he was not simply harassing a new resident. He was leveling a weapon at a highly trained CIA agent, and in that single act, he was placing his own career in mortal danger while unleashing a storm that would reduce his entire corrupt world to ashes. Before we step into this story of power, prejudice, and reckoning, tell me in the comments which part of the world you are watching from, and make certain you are subscribed with the notifications switched on, because the ending is something you will not want to miss. The sun over Crestwood Hills was merciless. It wrapped the perfect lawns in heat and glittered across the polished chrome of expensive cars. This was the kind of neighborhood where silence itself served as a badge of status, broken only by the distant hum of a lawnmower or the bright bark of a purebred dog. Amara Sinclair let the engine of her classic Mercedes settle into a soft purr and come to rest. The car, a sleek silver bullet, sat against the curb. She had only just moved in and was still growing accustomed to the quiet, understated luxury. The black silk of her dress, patterned with delicate white plum blossoms, felt cool against her skin as she stepped out. She had come simply to collect a package left at her door, a fleeting pocket of ordinary domestic calm in a life that almost never allowed it. That calm shattered the moment a patrol car screeched to a halt behind her, an ugly blue and white intrusion on the peaceful street. Officer Harlan Briggs climbed out with slow, deliberate movements, the practiced gait of a predator who owned every inch of his territory. His uniform stretched tight across a solid torso, and mirrored sunglasses hid eyes that Amara already knew were measuring her with a mixture of appraisal and scorn. She had met men like him in every corner of the world. They all wore the same uniform of arrogant superiority. "Ma'am, is this your vehicle?" he asked in a deceptively mild tone. "Yes, officer," Amara answered, her voice smooth as honey. She remained by the front door, the unopened package still in her hand. "Is there a problem?" Briggs circled the Mercedes at a leisurely pace, dragging a thick finger along the flawless paint. "The problem is that this vehicle is parked more than a foot from the curb. That's a violation." He stopped in front of her and finally removed the sunglasses. His eyes were a washed-out pale blue, lit by a predatory gleam. "And this is a fine car, too fine for a ticket." Amara's training snapped into place at once. A cold wave of tactical assessment extinguished the first spark of anger. Assess the threat. Briggs Harlan, somewhere in his 40s. Neighborhood officer with a poisonous reputation. She had reviewed his file before buying the house. Multiple complaints, every one of them dismissed. He believed himself untouchable. She offered him a polite, unthreatening smile. "I'm sorry, officer. I only stepped out for a moment. May I move it right away?" "Oh, you can move it," Briggs said, letting his gaze slide from her face down the silk that clung to her curves and then back up again. "But the ticket's already written. You see, it's a hefty fine in this neighborhood. We like to keep things orderly." He let the word hang in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. This had never been about a parking violation. It was about her presence, a black woman in his immaculate white enclave. She kept her jaw tight, yet her expression stayed serene. "Then give me the ticket, officer." Briggs' smile widened. He leaned against his cruiser and folded his arms, the relaxed posture itself an act of dominance. "Look, I can tell you're new around here. Maybe you don't understand how things work. A ticket like this stays on your record. Insurance goes up. It's a real mess." He paused, letting the silence stretch. But maybe we can make this little headache disappear. A community contribution, let's say. $200 in cash. And we forget the whole thing ever happened. The demand was so brazen, so swollen with corrupt confidence, that a dark and dangerous part of Amara almost laughed. Instead, her smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, icy refusal. "I'm not going to do that, officer." The atmosphere shifted at once. Briggs straightened. The friendly mask crumbled, revealing the ugly structure beneath. "I think you misunderstood me," he said, dropping his voice. "This is not a negotiation." "I think you misunderstood me," Amara answered, soft but unyielding. "I am not going to bribe you. You can write the ticket you claim you've already written, or you can get back in your car and leave." For a moment, Briggs simply stared, stunned. He was not accustomed to defiance. He was accustomed to fear and nervous obedience. Refusal was not merely a rejection of his offer. It was a rejection of his authority, of the entire world he had built around himself. His face flushed a deep, angry red. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Rolling in here with your fancy car and your silk dress, acting like you're better than everyone." He stepped closer, invading her space. The smell of stale coffee and cheap aftershave rolled off him. "Let me tell you who runs things around here." "I know exactly who runs things," Amara said, locking her dark eyes on his. "And it is not a common thief with a badge." The insult struck him like a physical blow. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "That's it. You're done." His hand dropped to his hip, but he did not reach for his ticket book. He drew his weapon. The sharp click of the safety releasing cracked through the quiet street. He did not aim it directly at her. He held it low, angled toward the ground, yet the threat was unmistakable. "You're resisting arrest. You're assaulting an officer." "I have done neither of those things," Amara said, her body perfectly still while her mind raced. Glock 19, right-handed, distance roughly 5 feet. The package is light, useless as a shield. The street is empty except for Mrs. Langford watering her roses 3 houses down, pretending she sees nothing. Briggs's lips curled into a snarl. "My word against yours. And guess who they'll believe? Hands behind your back. Now." He repeated the earlier words in a venomous hiss. "This car doesn't belong here. Neither do you." Birds still sang. In the heart of that picture-perfect neighborhood, a contest of wills was about to turn far more dangerous. He believed he was subduing a civilian. He had no idea he was pointing a weapon at someone who could end him. For a fraction of a second, Amara calculated the odds. She could disarm him in moments. A wrist lock, a precise elbow to the jaw, and the threat would be neutralized. Her body coiled, muscles tight as springs, ready to execute the lethal choreography years of training had burned into her. Then she caught a flicker of movement at the end of the street. Mrs. Langford finally looked up from her flowers, face twisted in shock. Another curtain twitched in the house across the way. Witnesses, but the wrong kind. Any physical confrontation here, no matter how justified, would become the story of a violent, unstable woman who attacked a police officer. It would be her word against his, and in this neighborhood, that story was already written. She exhaled slowly, releasing the tension from her shoulders. Long game, Amara. Think long game. "All right," she said, her voice betraying none of the cold fury burning inside her. She set the package carefully on the ground and raised her hands, a gesture of surrender that felt like swallowing broken glass. Briggs's smile was triumphant. This was the moment he had craved, the chance to break someone he considered beneath him and reassert his power. "That's a good girl," he said with open contempt, holstering the weapon with an arrogant click. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs that flashed in the sunlight. "See, we can get along once you learn some respect." He wrenched her arms behind her with unnecessary force. The metal bit into her wrists. He had tightened them deliberately, a petty act of cruelty meant to cause maximum pain. The sharp edges dug into her skin, yet Amara refused to give him the satisfaction of a sound. "You are making a serious mistake, Officer Briggs," she said, low and steady. "Oh, this is only the beginning," he mocked, shoving her toward the patrol car. "We're going to have a nice long talk downtown about that attitude of yours." The walk from her front door to his cruiser stretched forever. It was a carefully staged parade of humiliation. He pushed her forward so that every neighbor peering through blinds would have a clear view. The elegant new resident in her silk dress, now handcuffed like a common criminal. She felt their eyes on her, a mixture of pity, fear, and, for some, smug satisfaction. This is what happens when people get too confident. The silence on the street was deafening. No one stepped outside. No one spoke up. Mrs. Langford suddenly found her sprinklers endlessly fascinating. The man washing his car 2 houses down polished a single hubcap with fierce concentration. Their silence was complicity, a quiet endorsement of Briggs's actions, the sound of a community protecting a carefully constructed peace, even when that peace rested on injustice. Briggs shoved her against the hot metal of the cruiser. The heat burned through the thin silk. He began a search that was far too slow, far too intimate. His hands lingered at her waist, at her hips, a violation designed to strip away whatever dignity remained. "Gotta make sure you're not carrying," he growled, breath hot against her neck. Every instinct, honed by years in hostile places, screamed at her to fight back, to make him pay. Yet her mind stayed cold and clear. She cataloged the illegal search, the crushing pressure of the cuffs, the complete absence of probable cause, the witnesses who saw nothing. He found her phone and keys in the small purse. "What's this?" He yanked out her wallet, flipped it open, and his eyes widened slightly at the driver's license. Amara Sinclair. "So, you really do live here?" He sounded almost disappointed, as though he had hoped she was merely a visitor he could easily erase. He tossed her belongings onto the passenger seat and shoved her roughly into the back without bothering to shield her head. She ducked instinctively, avoiding a hard blow against the doorframe. The door slammed with a deafening thud, sealing her inside the cramped, stifling space. The metal cage separating front from back felt like the bars of a zoo enclosure. Through the window, she could still see her beautiful new house, the front door slightly ajar, the package she had longed to open still sitting on the perfect lawn. It all seemed to belong to another world. Briggs settled behind the wheel, and the car dipped under his weight. He smirked at her in the rearview mirror. "Ready for the grand tour of the city's finest accommodations." As he pulled away, an unfamiliar face appeared in the window of the neighboring house, a woman in her 30s, pale with worry. Their eyes met for an instant, and Amara saw not pity, but a shared, helpless anger. Then the woman vanished. The patrol car turned the corner, leaving the sunlit street behind. The humiliation was total. Yet as the familiar neighborhood slipped from view, Amara's mind shifted from recording the injustice to planning the revenge. The predator had taken the bait. Now it was time to set the trap. The sterile chemical reek of the station hit her the moment Briggs dragged her inside. A nauseating blend of industrial cleaner, stale coffee, and the faint undercurrent of human despair. The booking area was a sea of beige linoleum under flickering fluorescent lights that cast everything in a sickly green glow. A heavy-set desk sergeant named Clifford Kane, his nameplate nearly buried under greasy takeout containers, glanced up from a newspaper with pure boredom. His eyes traveled from Briggs to Amara, and a slow, lazy smile spread across his face. Well, Harlan, what have you dragged in this time?" he drawled, openly eyeing the silk dress and the bare, cuffed arms. Looks a little high class for our usual clientele. This one has an attitude problem, Cliff, Briggs announced to the room, pushing Amara toward the counter. New to the neighborhood. Thinks she's above the law. Resisting arrest. And I'm thinking about adding assault on an officer. His voice was loud, theatrical. He was performing for the other officers, reasserting his dominance. Amara stood silent, face expressionless, yet her eyes recorded every detail. The security camera in the corner with its red light dark, the overflowing trash can, the easy, friendly smiles the two officers leaning against the wall directed at her. This was not a police station. It was a private club, and she was the unwelcome guest they intended to teach a lesson. "I want my phone call," she said, voice calm and clear, cutting through the casual chatter. Kane let out an ugly laugh. "You'll get your call when we say you get it. First we do the paperwork." He shoved a filthy ink pad and a form across the counter. "Empty your pockets." "My belongings are in Officer Briggs's car," she answered dryly. "And I cannot empty my pockets with my hands cuffed behind my back." Briggs unlocked one cuff, yanked her arm forward for fingerprints, then snapped the metal shut again, tighter than before. He jammed her fingers into the ink with unnecessary force, staining them black. The entire process was a string of small, deliberate humiliations. Name, address, occupation. She answered each question with spare, precise words. When she said she was a consultant, Briggs and Kane exchanged a mocking glance. "Consultant, huh?" Briggs sneered. "That's what they're calling it these days." The implication was crude, but Amara ignored it. Letting them believe she was merely a wealthy woman without real power was essential to her strategy. She watched another officer pass, a young man named Reed Caldwell. He glanced at her and quickly looked away, yet not before she caught the discomfort in his eyes. He was different, a possible fracture in their wall of corrupt loyalty. They photographed her against a stained wall, the flash a harsh, repeated violation. Then, Briggs shoved her down a narrow corridor toward the holding cells. The air grew thicker, heavy with sweat and disinfectant. He stopped before an empty cell, metal bars casting long shadows across the floor. "You have no grounds to hold me," Amara said, planting her feet. "I have broken no law." "My report says otherwise," Briggs replied, face inches from hers. "It says you turned violent during a routine stop. It says you threatened me, and in this station my report is the truth." He yanked the door open with a loud clang and pushed her inside. She stumbled, recovered, and turned to face him through the bars. The heavy door slammed shut. The latch engaged with a sound of absolute finality. He lingered a moment, savoring the victory. "You should have paid the $200, sweetheart," he said with false sympathy. "Would have saved us all a lot of trouble. Now you're in the system, and believe me, it's hard to get out once you've crossed the wrong people." He turned and walked away. His footsteps faded, leaving her alone in the cold silence. She stood motionless in the center of the small concrete box. A thin metal bench was bolted to one wall. A combination sink and toilet occupied the corner. The air was stale, the temperature low. For anyone else, this would have been a moment of pure terror, the realization that the people sworn to protect her were the ones orchestrating her downfall, the crushing knowledge of being utterly alone and trapped by a lie she could not disprove. But Amara was not anyone else. The cold concrete felt familiar. The silence was an old companion. She had endured far worse. She had faced far more dangerous men. When the first surge of contained rage subsided, it was replaced by a concentration so sharp it was almost frightening. They believed they had caged a songbird. They had no idea they had locked themselves in with a tiger. The walls of their corrupt system were about to come down. Police Chief Elias Voss stared at the document on his desk as a cold knot tightened in his stomach. The preliminary arrest report was vague, littered with the generic language that always set off his internal alarms. Subject became aggressive, resisted. Situation escalated. The classic script of a fabricated violent arrest. Yet it was not the flimsy pretext that chilled his blood. It was the name listed beneath the detainee, Amara Sinclair. He read it again and again, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into someone else. Someone who was not the woman who had filled his life with a light he had not realized was missing until she was gone. The woman he loved. City lights glittered through the window of his new office. He had accepted the position as a transfer from a larger, cleaner department, charged with reforming a station notorious for its outdated and toxic culture. He had known he was walking into a nest of vipers, a place where corruption was woven into the very fabric of the institution. For months he had been patiently unraveling the threads, identifying the key players, among them Officer Harlan Briggs, whose name now sat at the bottom of this report. Briggs was old school, a bully who treated his badge as a license to intimidate and extort. Elias had been building a case against him with meticulous care, waiting for the right moment to cut out the cancer. He had never imagined Briggs would bring the fight straight to his door by targeting the one person in the world he most needed to protect. A cold, precise fury settled over him. This was no ordinary act of police corruption. It was personal. It was a message. Briggs, or whoever stood behind him, was testing him, watching to see whether he would look the other way to protect his own or follow protocol, and in doing so, validate the very system he had come to destroy. They were trying to trap him into compromising himself from the start. He clenched a fist on the oak desk. They had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They believed his relationship with Amara was his weakness. They had no idea it was their death sentence. He lifted the phone and dialed the night shift commander. "This is Chief Voss. I want eyes on the detainee in Cell 3, Amara Sinclair. Supervise her for her own safety. No one enters or leaves that cell without my direct authorization." "Understood." The surprise in the commander's voice was audible, even over the line. "Yes, Chief. Crystal clear. And send me the complete, unedited body camera footage of Officer Briggs's arrest. Now." Elias's tone left no room for argument. He hung up before the man could reply. He knew what the video would likely show, or more importantly, what it would not show. Briggs was careless, but not stupid. He knew exactly when to activate and deactivate the camera to craft the narrative he wanted. Time crawled. Elias's mind kept returning to his last conversation with Amara. She had been so excited about the house, about finally putting down roots. They had planned a quiet dinner to celebrate. Now she sat in one of his own cells, a victim of the very disease he had been hired to cure. The rage was physical, a burning pressure behind his eyes, yet he forced it down and transformed it into cold, relentless determination. He could not storm into the station and free her. That was exactly what they wanted. It would discredit him, make him appear to be abusing his authority for personal reasons. He had to follow their own protocol and turn it into the weapon that destroyed them. An email arrived. The video. Elias opened it with a clenched jaw. As he had suspected, the camera activated only after Amara was already in handcuffs. The footage showed her standing silent and defiant, while Briggs delivered a self-serving monologue about her supposed unprovoked aggression. A carefully constructed fiction. Yet Briggs had made one critical mistake. In the reflection of the car window, for a single instant, Elias saw Briggs's hand resting on his still holstered weapon before he claimed she had turned violent. It was a tiny detail, subtle, but sufficient. A crack in the lie. He saved the file to a secure, encrypted drive and labeled the new folder Briggs Elimination. This was no longer an internal affairs investigation. This was war. He would use every resource and every ounce of authority at his disposal to burn Harlan Briggs's world to the ground and bring Amara home. He only hoped she could hold on until he reached her. He knew she was strong. He had no idea just how strong. Time in the cell passed with agonizing slowness. Each distant tick of a clock measured the deliberate stripping of her rights. Amara sat upright on the cold metal bench, breathing slow and steady, conserving energy. Her mind was a tireless engine of analysis and strategy. The initial humiliation had burned away, leaving only the icy focus of a field operative deep in hostile territory. Her goal was no longer simple release. It was the complete dismantling of the corrupt machine that had put her here. She needed a tool, a message, a way to light the fuse. The rhythmic footsteps of the guards changed. A new officer was making the rounds. It was the young man she had noticed earlier, Reed Caldwell, moving with a nervous energy that set him apart from the other's swagger. He paused in front of her cell, pretending to check the lock while keeping his back to the main corridor. He did not look at her directly, but his voice came in a low, urgent whisper. "They're building a case. Briggs and Kane are writing the report right now, falsifying everything." Amara neither moved nor spoke. She simply listened, eyes fixed on a crack in the concrete wall. Any visible reaction would be a mistake. The station had microphones. She had to play the part, even if the cameras were dark. Caldwell jangled his keys, the metallic sound a nervous cover for his words. "Everyone here is either involved or too scared to speak. Briggs has done this dozens of times. They go after people they think have no one to fight for them." Shame and anger colored his voice. "They think you're just another one." He drew a deep breath, as if crossing a line he could never uncross. "I can't do much. They're watching all of us. But there's a phone booth in the Sally port, the one they use for prisoner transfers. The camera has a blind spot in the right corner. They're bringing a drunk in soon. That will create a distraction." He slipped a tiny folded scrap of paper between the bars. It was no larger than a thumbnail and fell silently at her feet. "You'll have a couple of minutes. Use them." Then he was gone, footsteps fading down the corridor, leaving only the paper as proof of his dangerous act of defiance. Amara waited until she was certain she was alone, tracking the station's rhythms by sound alone. Distant laughter, a locker slamming, a telephone ringing. Only then did she move, fluid and precise. She crouched, retrieved the paper, and settled back on the bench, concealing it in her palm. They had taken her shoes, but the simple A-line dress had a fine hidden seam in the hem, where she kept a slender, flexible lockpick, a relic of another life that was rapidly becoming her present. Working beneath the cover of the metal bench, her fingers moved with near-silent precision. In moments, the handcuffs clicked open and dropped into her lap. She rubbed her wrists as blood returned in a painful rush of pins and needles. The relief was enormous, a small but vital victory. She unfolded the note. There was no name, no number, only a simple hand-drawn map of the station's rear corridors with a small X marking the phone booth in the Sally port. Beneath it, a single word: Jericho. It was a code word, an old CIA protocol for agents compromised on domestic soil by a hostile internal force when every official channel was blocked. It activated emergency extraction and sanction procedures. Caldwell was not merely a disgruntled young officer. He was something more, or he knew someone who was. The source no longer mattered. The message did. Distant shouts and commotion announced the arrival of the intoxicated prisoner. This was her opening. She slipped the open handcuffs back onto her wrists without locking them and moved to the cell door, pressing her ear to the cold steel. The main corridor was clear. Using the lockpick again, She attacked the crude cell lock. It was laughably simple compared with the high security systems she knew. It yielded in seconds. She slipped out, a shadow in the dim hallway, bare feet silent on the linoleum. Following Caldwell's map, she navigated the labyrinth of back passages that smelled of damp and old paper, moving with the silent efficiency of a ghost. At last she saw it. The security lock. A wide garage-like space, and in the corner, exactly as Caldwell had described, a battered old phone booth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from pure adrenaline. She had her tool. Now it was time to light the fuse and watch the entire structure burn. The public telephone looked like a relic from another era. The plastic handset was grimy and cold against her ear. Amara's fingers flew across the keypad, entering a long, memorized sequence that opened a gateway into a secure, untraceable satellite network routing through a dozen countries. She pressed herself into the corner, precisely where the camera's blind spot began, while the chaos of the new prisoner provided a symphony of cover noise. The line clicked. A cold, synthesized voice spoke a single word. Authenticate. Sparrow, Amara whispered her call sign. Authorization code Setu Quen Inner Delta. A pause stretched while digital verification ran its course. Then a calm, professional human voice came on the line. Sparrow, we have you. Report status. Status compromised, Amara said, voice low, urgent, and flat. Hostile domestic entity. Local law enforcement. Location: Crestwood Municipal Station. She gave the precise address. Detained on false charges. Situation controlled. But the network is systemic. Understood, the voice replied. Impassive. Do you require immediate extraction? That was the critical question. Extraction would be swift and silent. A team of ghosts would enter the station. She would vanish from her cell, leaving local authorities baffled and triggering a federal investigation. But the investigation would be clean, too clean. Briggs and his circle would be disciplined, perhaps fired. Yet the deeper infection would remain. The community would continue to suffer in silence. Negative on extraction, Amara said, resolve hardening. The hostile network is deeply entrenched. Extraction will only cauterize the wound. It will not eradicate the disease. I want Protocol Jericho activated. Dead silence answered her. Jericho was the nuclear option. It was not about saving one agent. It was about dismantling an entire corrupt power structure from within. It authorized large-scale surveillance, resource deployment, and psychological operations on American soil. It was rarely invoked and carried enormous risk. Jericho is a high-impact protocol, the voice warned. It requires director-level approval. The threat to national security is credible, Amara replied, choosing every word with lethal precision. This station functions as a criminal enterprise targeting citizens on the basis of race and economic status. They have compromised judicial contacts and potentially federal ones. This is not mere corruption. It is a systemic collapse of civil rights creating a pocket of internal instability. It is a direct threat. She let the carefully selected key phrases hang in the air, knowing they would trigger every alarm at Langley. Another, longer pause. She could picture the scene on the other end. A silent underground vault. Analysts moving at full speed. Satellite imagery blooming across screens. Digital dossiers on every employee of the Crestwood Police Department, assembling in real time. Stand by, Sparrow. The line remained open, but silent. Amara kept her eyes locked on the access door, senses stretched to their limit. Her window of time was nearly gone. Every second felt fragile. Finally, the voice returned, heavier now, carrying new authority. Protocol Sparrow. Jericho is authorized. Your contact is in command. We have your location. Resources are deploying. What are your operational requirements? A faint smile touched Amara's lips. The balance of power had just shifted completely. She was no longer a prisoner. She was the tip of the spear. Requirement 1. Complete remote surveillance of this facility. Audio, video, thermal. I want to see and hear everything. Requirement 2. Full financial and psychological profiles on Officer Harlan Briggs, Sergeant Clifford Kane, and anyone they communicate with. I want to know where they buy their coffee, who they sleep with, and where they hide every dirty dollar. Requirement 3. I am converting this recovery into a full covert operation. I will need a clean phone, a high-fidelity audio recorder disguised as jewelry, and a substantial quantity of marked currency. Arrange a covert delivery. Received, Control answered. Resources will be in place shortly. Delivery will be coordinated. What is your immediate plan? Amara glanced back toward the dark corridor and her empty cell. My immediate plan is to return to my cage before they notice I'm gone. I will play the terrified, broken victim. I will pretend to surrender. And then I will set a trap for the predator, whose arrogance will never let him see it coming. Understood. Sparrow Control out. The line went dead. Amara carefully replaced the receiver. She drew a deep breath, steadying the adrenaline still racing through her veins, then slipped back through the shadowed passages as silently as a whisper. She re-entered the cell, locked the door from inside, and settled onto the bench, slipping the open handcuffs back onto her wrists. Once again, she was a prisoner, a helpless woman in a silk dress. But now, invisible eyes watched. Invisible ears listened. An invisible army was mobilizing. Officer Briggs believed he had won. He had no idea the real game had only just begun. Light filtered through the high, grimy window of the cell, casting a pale square on the concrete floor. Amara had not slept. She had spent the dark hours in deep meditation, slowing her heart rate and sharpening her focus. When she heard the heavy, familiar tread of Officer Briggs approaching, she began the transformation. Her rigid posture softened. She drew her knees to her chest in a classic defensive curl. She allowed exhaustion and fear to settle across her features and forced a faint, almost imperceptible tremor into her hands. By the time Briggs appeared at the bars, she was the perfect image of a shattered woman. His smile was cruel and satisfied. "Morning, sunshine," he drawled, rapping the bars with his baton. "Sleep well, or did you stay up all night thinking about those brilliant choices you made?" Amara looked up at him with wide, reddened eyes. She had bitten the inside of her lip just hard enough to draw a single drop of blood, giving her the metallic taste of genuine fear that made the performance flawless. "Please," she whispered, voice trembling and broken. "I made a mistake. I was scared. I'm new here. I don't know anyone." The change in her was exactly what he had hoped for, exactly what he needed. His chest swelled with ego. He had broken her. "A little late for apologies, isn't it?" he said, though his tone had softened. He was enjoying this too much to end it quickly. "The charges are already filed. Resisting arrest, assault on an officer. You're looking at serious time." "No, please," she begged, a single perfect tear sliding down her cheek. "I can't. My job, my life, everything will be ruined. Isn't there anything I can do?" She dropped her gaze, the picture of absolute despair. Briggs moved closer to the bars, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial murmur. "I told you what you could have done before. You chose to make it hard." "I know, I'm so sorry," she sobbed, burying her face against her knees. "I was stupid. I panicked. Officer, is that offer still open? It's still on the table. I'll pay. I'll pay whatever you want. Just make this stop." Greed flared in his eyes, a sharp, hungry light that outshone even his arrogance. Not only had he crushed her spirit, he was about to walk away with her money as well. He would have everything. He pretended to consider, stroking his chin. I don't know. You made a scene. You called me a thief. That's a serious accusation. My reputation's damaged. 500? Amara blurted, voice muffled by her knees. I can get you 500. Briggs chuckled. 500, ma'am. You assaulted a police officer. You think that goes away for 500? The price just went up. This was the pivotal moment. She had to raise the figure high enough to be irresistible, yet still believable, for a desperate woman of her apparent means. 2,000, she whispered, looking up with pleading eyes. It's everything I have in my emergency fund. I can have the bank authorize a cash withdrawal. Please. Briggs's eyes lit up. $2,000 was more than a week's pay. The risk was almost non-existent. He already had her locked into false charges. If she paid, he would make the report disappear. If she did not, he would bury her under them. Either way, he won. All right, he said with exaggerated magnanimity. You're lucky I'm a reasonable man. 2,000 in cash. No transfers, no friends. One phone call. Call your bank. Get them to authorize a cash withdrawal at an ATM. I'll take you myself. You get the money, you hand it over, and I'll make sure this whole report gets lost. He was so certain, so blinded by arrogance and greed, that he never saw the trap closing around him. He believed he was dictating the terms of her surrender. In reality, he was walking, step by careful step, into the intricate web she and Control had woven while the station slept. Thank you, she whispered. The relief in her voice sounded utterly genuine. Thank you so much, officer. He unlocked the cell. On your feet. You've got a call to make. As he guided her down the corridor toward the booking desk, Amara allowed her body to tremble. She leaned lightly against him, playing the fragile, defeated victim. He placed a possessive hand on her arm, a gesture meant to seem reassuring. That was really just another claim of ownership. At the desk, he handed her the telephone, while Kane watched with a self-satisfied smirk. She dialed the number Control had supplied, a sterile, secure line engineered to mimic an automated bank system. In a trembling voice, she provided the false account numbers and passwords. On the other end, a CIA analyst with a doctorate in linguistics played the role of bank teller, confirming the funds and authorizing the withdrawal. Briggs took the phone from her. Let's go. Time for the ATM. As he led her out a rear door toward an unmarked car, Amara caught sight of Officer Caldwell, watching from a distance, face pale but resolute. She gave him the barest, almost invisible nod. The predator believed he was leading his prey to the slaughter. He had no idea he was the one walking into the abattoir. The unmarked car was a nondescript gray sedan that smelled of stale air freshener and suspicion. Briggs drove with white-knuckled intensity, nervous energy rolling off him now that the money was so close. Amara sat in the passenger seat, hands cuffed in front, continuing the performance of a terrified woman. She kept her head down, sobbing softly from time to time, while her razor-sharp mind mapped every detail. She noted that he did not drive toward the nearest bank, but toward a more isolated ATM in a quiet strip mall on the edge of town. Clever. He wanted as few witnesses as possible. It would not matter. Do this, and the whole thing goes away, Briggs said, more to reassure himself than her. The report disappears. It's like yesterday never happened. Just remember to show a little more respect next time. I will, Amara whispered, voice shaking. I've learned my lesson. Inside the delicate plum blossom earring she still wore, the only piece of jewelry they had allowed her to keep, a high-fidelity microphone, transmitted at every word to a CIA listening post in a nondescript van 2 blocks away. Every syllable of his self-incriminating monologue was captured in perfect digital clarity. They pulled into the nearly empty parking lot. Long shadows stretched across the asphalt. Briggs parked a short distance from the ATM, tucked into a recess beside a closed laundry. "Here's how this works," he said, killing the engine. "I'm going to uncuff one hand. You walk over to that machine, withdraw the 2,000, and bring it straight back to me. No tricks. I'll be watching every second. Clear?" "Yes," she answered meekly. He leaned across, the key clicking in the right cuff. The moment her hand was free, he clamped his fingers around her wrist. "I mean it," he growled, face inches from hers. "You try anything, and I'll drag you back to that cell and throw away the key. Understood?" "Completely," she whispered. She stepped out of the car, with deliberately slow, uncertain movements. The short walk to the ATM felt endless under his stare. The entire strip mall was under surveillance. A gardener trimming hedges across the street was a CIA field operative. The delivery truck at the far end of the lot was the mobile command center. Overnight, a technical team had converted the ATM. Its camera no longer served only the bank, but streamed high-definition video directly to control. Amara inserted the clean debit card the agency had provided, entered the PIN, and requested the amount. The machine whirred and clicked, dispensing a thick stack of crisp $100 bills. She gathered the money with exaggeratedly trembling hands and turned back toward the car. Briggs's eyes were locked on the cash with raw, predatory hunger. A small smile curved his lips. He had won. Impatient, he climbed out to meet her. "Count it," he ordered, voice thick with greed. She obeyed, counting the 20 bills into his open palm. "It's all there." "Good girl," he said, stuffing the money into his pocket. "Now, about that report." He never finished the sentence. From 3 directions at once, black tactical vans roared into the parking lot, sealing every exit. Doors flew open, and a dozen federal agents in full tactical gear poured out, weapons raised. "FBI, hands up, on your knees now." Briggs froze, face contorted in comic disbelief. The money was still in his hand. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. He looked from the agents to Amara, his mind struggling to process the impossible. Amara stood motionless. The frightened victim mask fell away, revealing the cold, relentless professional beneath. There was not a trace of pity in her expression. "Officer Harlan Briggs," she said in a voice of quiet authority that cut through the sudden silence. "You are under arrest for extortion, abuse of authority, and bribery." A veteran FBI agent, personally briefed by Elias Voss, stepped forward and snapped regulation handcuffs onto Briggs's wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent began, in a flat, professional monotone. Briggs finally found his voice, a choked, desperate cry. "It's a setup! She set me up! I'm a cop!" Amara looked down at the kneeling, humiliated man, who only a short time earlier had terrorized her, degraded her, and threatened her life. "No," she said, her voice as cold and sharp as broken ice. "You were a cop. Now you are only evidence." The raid on Crestwood Municipal Station struck with the speed and force of a lightning bolt. While Briggs still knelt in the strip mall parking lot, blinking in stunned confusion, 2 federal teams simultaneously breached the front and rear entrances of the station. The operation was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. Officers who moments earlier had been sipping coffee and chatting found themselves staring down the barrels of M4 rifles, while sharp commands echoed off the beige walls. "FBI, nobody move! Hands where we can see them!" Sergeant Clifford Kane was in the middle of falsifying Briggs's arrest report on Amara when his office door burst open. He looked up, greasy donut halfway to his mouth, and met the hard stares of 3 federal agents. "Sergeant Kane," the lead agent said, holding up a warrant. "You are under arrest for conspiracy and obstruction of justice." Kane's face went white. The donut dropped onto the stack of papers with a soft thud. He began to bluster and protest, but the agent's cold professionalism silenced him at once. They already knew everything. The game was over. The entire station was locked down. Phones were seized, computers confiscated. Working from the detailed intelligence control had supplied, the federal teams moved with ruthless efficiency. They knew exactly which lockers to search, which files to pull, which officers formed the core of the corrupt network. Officer Reed Caldwell, the young policeman who had risked everything to help Amara, stood quietly in a corner and directed the federal team to a hidden ledger in the records room, where Briggs and his circle had kept an unofficial tally of their extortion payments. His quiet act of courage became the key that unlocked the entire conspiracy. Press crews, alerted by a series of anonymous yet meticulously detailed emails from a concerned citizen, arrived in time to film the arrests. They captured Kane being led out in handcuffs, his usual smug expression replaced by pure shock. They recorded 6 more officers being loaded into federal vehicles, badges already stripped from their uniforms. The story exploded across every local news channel, interrupting regular programming. The headline was blunt and damning: FBI raids local station in massive anti-corruption sweep. At the center of every report was the crystal-clear ATM footage the agency had strategically leaked. Briggs's greedy monologue about being a reasonable man played on endless loop. The evidence was irrefutable. The man who had built his career by preying on the powerless was now a national disgrace. His downfall broadcast live. Back in the parking lot, as agents guided Briggs into a vehicle, he saw Amara speaking with the lead FBI agent. The handcuffs were gone. She stood as an equal, posture confident, voice calm and authoritative. The full truth finally crashed over him, so catastrophic, he almost laughed. "Who are you?" he shouted from the back seat, voice cracking with despair. "Who the hell are you?" Amara met his eyes through the window with an expression that gave nothing away. She did not answer. She simply turned and walked away, leaving him to stare at the ruins of his life. The repercussions spread outward with stunning speed. The mayor called an emergency press conference and stammered about a few bad apples, while federal agents carried box after box of evidence out of the station behind him. The district attorney, who for years had dismissed countless complaints against Briggs, suddenly announced a comprehensive review of every case connected to the arrested officers. The empire of corruption that had once seemed impregnable crumbled like a sandcastle before a storm. Telephones began ringing in the homes of judges, prosecutors, and city officials, men who had been quiet accomplices in the terror that ruled the station for years. They understood that the FBI would not stop at a handful of street cops. The entire network was in the crosshairs. The fear Briggs and his men had spent years instilling in the community now turned back on them. From his office overlooking the chaos, Chief Elias Voss watched it all unfold. A grim, deeply satisfied smile touched his face. The fire had been lit. His only remaining task was to ensure it consumed every last trace of the corruption. Crestwood Hills underwent a painful but necessary transformation. The federal investigation, fueled by the evidence Amara had gathered and the secrets revealed in Caldwell's ledger, dug deeper and deeper, exposing a decade of systemic abuse. 17 officers, including Briggs and Kane, were formally charged with federal crimes ranging from extortion to civil rights violations. The district attorney resigned in disgrace after emails exposed his role in covering up evidence. The entire station was dismantled. Federal authorities and a state task force assumed control of its operations. For the residents who had lived under Briggs's corrupt regime, it felt as though the sun had finally broken through after a long, dark storm. People began to speak. A neighborhood meeting organized by community activists, filled with citizens sharing stories they had kept buried for years out of fear. A Hispanic business owner wept as he described the monthly protection money Briggs had extracted from him. An elderly African-American woman recounted how her grandson had been falsely charged with drug possession after a minor traffic stop. Story after story poured out, a torrent of long-suppressed pain and injustice. At last, standing in the light, they were no longer afraid. Amara stood at the back of the hall with Elias beside her. She had given her official statement. Her identity as a CIA officer remained classified. Her public role was described simply as that of a federal consultant who had been instrumental in the undercover operation. She needed no public recognition. The scene unfolding before her was enough. The relief on people's faces, the new strength in their voices as they reclaimed their town. That was the true victory. Elias put his arm around her. "You did it," he said quietly, voice thick with emotion and pride. "You gave them back their voice." "We did it," she corrected softly, resting her head against his shoulder. And so did they. They only needed to know that someone was finally listening. The trial of Harlan Briggs was swift. Prosecutors presented the high-definition video of the bribe, the crystal-clear audio captured by Amara's earring, and the devastating testimony of dozens of his victims. His defense collapsed almost at once. The image of his arrogant face accepting the money was burned into the public memory. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, a spectacular fall for the man who had once ruled Crestwood's streets with an iron fist. He was no longer a predator. He was simply a pathetic figure in an orange jumpsuit, stripped of every shred of power. On a warm afternoon, Amara stood on the porch of her new house. The street was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet, peaceful rather than fearful. Mrs. Langford, who lived at the far end of the block, waved as she walked her dog, a genuine, kindly smile on her face. The neighbor who had watched the original confrontation with helpless anger had brought a welcome basket. The community was healing, slowly and carefully, but steadily. Elias pulled up to the curb, not in an official vehicle, but in his own car. He stepped out, walked up the path, and took her into his arms. The silver Mercedes sat in the driveway exactly where it belonged. "It's over," he said, holding her tightly. "No," Amara answered, gazing out at the neighborhood bathed in golden light. "This is only the beginning. What happened in Crestwood was never just about the fall of a few corrupt men. It was a reminder of the quiet strength that rises to meet arrogance, and of the deeper truth that real power is not carried in a gun or a badge. It lives in the unbreakable courage to stand against injustice. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, a single defiant voice can be enough to shatter the silence and let the light in. True justice is not about revenge. It is about rebuilding a world where no one ever has to endure that silence again. What part of Briggs's downfall satisfied you most? What does a story like this tell us about courage in our own communities? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for walking this road with us.